there's lots of evidence. I mean, especially I don't know if you've done a lot of research on Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. Graham Hancock wrote a book called Fingerprints of the Gods, where he talks about those lost civilizations that got wiped out. And basically what he says, there's multiple cataclysmic events that happened throughout the history of the Earth, throughout the last 6 billion years, that aren't accounted for in basically modern studies of history, and ice ages that aren't accounted for. And basically the basic summary of it is that there were civilizations just as advanced as us, if not more advanced, that got wiped out by crazy ice ages and comets that hit the Earth. Like there was a new meteorite location in Greenland, I think it is, where it's like an 18-mile wide comet.
Wow. That
would have wiped out the Earth and seared the top of the planet. And they also showed they have tons of YouTube videos and podcasts that actually detail this. So if you're watching this, search Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson, where they talk about it, and they even show detailed photos of if you go to the beach and it's low tide, like right after the water goes back out, near the shore you'll see like those ripples in the sand where water was just there, and like when current rips through an area like in a river, you'll see ripples in the sand. Basically what they show is in Washington, when you fly over these Great Plains in Washington, there's these same exact ripples that are miles and miles and miles long.
Wow.
Where basically it proves his theory that there was massive, sea level changes, where in one day the sea levels would rise by 300, 400 feet because of these ice caps melting, because these comets would hit Earth and basically just create an instant climate change that would, in one afternoon, basically raise the temperature of the Earth by, 100 degrees, and the whole top of the continent would be on fire, and it would add 400 to 300 feet of sea water on top of whatever was just there earlier that afternoon.
Sure. That water rushes in, I'm sure, as that blows up. And
the same thing what you see at the beach with those little ripples in the sand, or in a river mouth, those little ripples in the sand underneath the water. Yeah. So it's absolutely mind-blowing.
No, like I say, man, there's still so much that we don't know. Even going out to Utah, and I've gone out there several times. We went out there with the family one year and found shells, seashells in a high desert somewhere. So the water was up at that point.
Right.
There was even a study here, I want to say about 5 years ago, and they're always finding these mastodon, these little baby elephants and whatnot throughout Greenland. And they end up finding one day where the skin was still on it. It still had flesh, and it'd been frozen. And the strange thing was that they've obviously the scientists were all excited, and they pack this little animal up and they bring him back to the lab, and they start looking at him, and they found him in a frozen environment. But the interesting thing was that the contents of its stomach were still there, and they were buttercups. And he said when this animal was killed, he was in a field where there were buttercups. So whatever change happened.
Buttercups?
It's just a small plant that they would eat.
Okay.
Like a grass plant.
Okay.
And he said that whatever event took place, wherever this little baby mastodon elephant was eating, was hit by a wall of ice and covered instantly. So whether it was an environmental change that happened right now, or it was a meteorite that struck the planet, part of that event, let's say, that took place, that hit him, but he was in a warm environment right when he died. And so when you look at, there's now scientists that are looking at those events and going, hey, listen, some of these events were catastrophic. They didn't happen over time.
Yeah.
They happened right now. And so when you look at those events like that, I could absolutely see that happening.
Yeah, this guy, Randall Carlson, talks about how during some of these events that icebergs the size of oil tankers would be just sliding, would just be being carried across the continent. And those icebergs are full of rock and debris at the same time. So when those things carry lots of rock and lots of big debris and fragments. So when those things melted, it explains why all these rocks are now scattered in
these
places
huge 100-ton stones.
Right.
Never be.
These 100-ton stones were frozen in these 1,000-ton icebergs or something ridiculous. I don't know the exact number, but these massive icebergs that were bigger than oil tankers just being sliding across the Earth and completely just melting and powderizing anything in its way.
And like I say, we're still seeing those changes today. You know, if you look at how the tides have come up here, just in Florida, there's areas. You know, I grew up here. There's areas where I used to go fishing at down by the shoreline, and today at high tide, those areas flood, and they didn't flood when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So these events are definitely happening. There's changes going on, whether it's related to the sun or to environmental, whether we're doing it, becomes a whole other story. I think they're naturally occurring events that take place. I watched a program the other night that talked about alien beings, and he said what they started talking about giving us the different types of blood types that we have: A positive, O, A negative. Looking at these different blood types, and those blood types were given to us so that if they at any one point in time they didn't like what was going on with that group of people, they could develop a bug that would after just that blood type and would kill them off.
Where'd you watch this?
So they were talking. Well, they started talking about
Towards you.
the big plague, the bubonic plague.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And they said, so when you look at these catastrophic events throughout history that take mankind out, they only take out a certain group, and as fast as they come in, they leave again. And so he said what he believed was that the planet is a living entity, and that we're kind of like a bacteria on it. And for the last thousands and thousands of years, the extraterrestrials have been grooming us and trying to get us to do a certain thing. And every time we wouldn't do that certain thing, they would come through and kind of wipe us out. So if you go back and look at the history of mankind, and you think, well, man, the Great Flood they talk about in the Bible, and the bubonic plague, and the Spanish flu, and all these different events that come through and kill just hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, said were brought on purpose by extraterrestrial beings.
Well, another thing to consider is there's, as far as like these big cataclysmic events that happen that wipe out civilizations and then wipe out the face of the earth, there's, for instance, there's this thing called the Taurid meteor stream, which is basically this it's this like 1,000,000-mile wide stream of meteors and comets that the Earth actually passes through twice a year.
Okay.
I think it's once in June and once in November. And apparently the equivalence of the Earth passing through this stream and not getting hit by a 8-mile wide comet is the equivalence of you putting on a blindfold and walking and running across a 6-lane highway praying you don't get hit by a truck.
My luck's not that good, by the way.
Yeah. But he was basically claiming that the Earth passes through this thing twice a year, and there's a handful of comets in that meteor stream, the Taurid meteor stream, that are big enough to completely wipe out the face of the Earth. So it's only a matter of time before one of those comets hits the Earth again and just completely destroys the Earth and everything every living thing.
Now, did you see this meteor that came in through Russia? I want to say it was 3 or 4 years ago. It was actually one that came in through Gorbosk, Russia. And in the process of actually coming down to the ground, something hit it.
Yeah, it exploded. Well, I think what happened was the atmosphere basically burned it up, and it exploded in the air before it hit the ground, right?
Well, what they do is they actually show something that actually
what's that thing called again?
Flies up to it and hits it. And they actually give this thing credit for that thing not hitting the Earth. Well, again, listen, if this is a living, and let's go with this for a second. Let's just say the planet is a living entity. And when I asked one of the guys who's putting on the class, well, let me ask you this. Okay, let's just say that you're right and that we were given blood types for that reason, and we are a bacteria.
Yeah.
What's the focus? I mean, what are we supposed to do? And he said, listen, we've done it and we've mastered it, and it's carbon dioxide. We now put more carbon dioxide in the history of mankind. And he goes, I said, well, why would you say that? He said, well, the reason I say that is because there's more people on the planet now than ever recorded history.
Right.
If we weren't doing the right things, he goes, they'd get rid of us because it's not healthy for the planet. And so everything comes back to the planet. I said, so you don't think these are from other worlds? And he's like, oh no, they've always been right here. Again, their primary function is to make sure that the planet stays healthy and on its game.